Good morning. So they came to me and they're like, hey, so on May 25th, you're gonna preach. And I was like, yeah, to middle school. That's what I do on Sundays. And they're like, no, to the full-size humans. And I was like, are you sure? And then I prayed and I was like, Lord, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. And alas, here I am. So we can see how that went. But I'm Morgan. If you have been coming here for months and you've never seen me, that's because they typically lock me in the basement. I'm just kidding. They don't lock me, but that's typically where I am. But I'm excited to be here with you all going through this essential series. So I love that we're walking through the Bible together in a year. Like Pastor Dick said, I'm actually in school right now and I'm in a research cohort. And one of the things I've spent a lot of time researching is this thing called Bible fluency. So Bible fluency, it's actually distinct and different from maybe what you've heard before, which is like Bible literacy. But Bible fluency, to give you a more full understanding, I put together a definition for you. It's this. Bible fluency is the ability to understand, apply, and speak about the Bible effectively. It goes beyond just knowing Bible facts and involves engaging with the text, understanding its literary elements, and recognizing its principles in the context of modern life. Essentially, it's about becoming comfortable and confident in the language of the Bible and using that understanding to think, speak, and live in a way that aligns with its teaching. So in the way that I'm studying it, it's who has Bible fluency and who doesn't, and what did they do to develop it, and what's the difference in young people who develop it versus young people who don't. And what we know is that young people who develop Bible fluency defy statistics, and they become students who never leave the faith because it's so deeply woven into their very being. And so if you want to be a person that through your influence and leadership develops Bible fluency yourself and also helps develop it in other people, step one is becoming familiar with the story, right? And the way I talk about students about this is, you know, maybe you've read the Gospel of Luke one summer, you were super motivated. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking shade on Luke. Luke's my favorite gospel if I were to have a favorite. But if you just kind of like pop in here and there and your exposure to the Bible is mostly scriptures used in sermons on a Sunday, it's kind of like if you were to watch a movie, but you sit down to watch it 20 minutes in, and then like you get a snack, so you leave for a little bit and you pop back down, it's entirely new cast, and you're like, wait, what happened? What happened to the old people? Like, why did they respond that way? It's because you're missing really important parts of the story, so you're just kind of lost. So the Bible, while it's composed of many books, it's this meta story of the relationship between God and his people that he loves. And so to get the full picture, you really need to read through the whole thing. So I love that we're doing it. Where we are at so far as a church in the story, we are still in the first half. It's a pretty big book. We're in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew word, if you are into that kind of thing, is the Tanakh. So repeat after me, the Tanakh. Look at you. You went to seminary, I can tell. All right, so the Tanakh has these three kind of literary categories. If you're not into this kind of thing, that's okay. My brain processes this way. So the first category is called the Torah, or the law. That's the first 5 books we've already spent a lot of time in. We encounter creation and some of the first major characters in the story, what sin is and its influence on humanity moving forward. The second category is Nevi'im. That's prophets. That's actually where our story today that we're going to read is situated in. And then the third category is Ketuvim, which is just general writings. We get a lot of Hebrew poetry in that section. But overall, the Tanakh is a prophetic interpretation of Israel's history. We've been talking a lot about that. That reveals God's purpose to rescue the world. So the plot is that God is going to rescue the world, and he's chosen to do it through humans. But if you've been reading along, you know that humans are also the problem, right? Like we can't seem to pull it together. And this equation, though, God doesn't abandon the plan to use humans, right? God doesn't change, the plan doesn't change. So we're left with this proposal that's actually quite mysterious. It's okay, then we need a new type of human. So what does that mean? And we'll get more into that. So we're gonna do a really macroscopic overview of where we're at in the story, because maybe you're just popping in today and you're like, I don't know any of these things. That's okay, I'm gonna catch you up. So like if this was Netflix, this is like last season on The Chosen. Here's an overview of what we've talked about. All right, we've been introduced to these characters, Abraham and Sarah. They're important, right? God makes a promise and a covenant with them, and he blesses them. And through them, we start to feel hope for humanity, right? Like maybe things are gonna turn around. But woven into their story is this radical family dysfunction, probably like most of our families, right? And then after them, we're introduced to this character named Moses. Moses receives these 613 laws. Again, we're like, okay, maybe humanity's going to turn it around. These laws that God gives Moses, it's actually not because God is like this divine HOA. I'm sorry if that word is triggering to some of you, or maybe that's just mine. But it's because God is literally giving them a roadmap as to how to be that new kind of human that the world needs for redemption, right? So again, we're like, okay, maybe we're gonna figure it out. But if you've been reading along, and especially if you read 1st and 2nd Kings, which is where our stories are situated today, then you know that that's not exactly how the story goes. There's this really exhausting pattern repetition. The sin that we see in the Garden of Eden in the very beginning, the posture of people and their heart situation under the leadership of Moses, we just see them doing the same things over and over. They're lying, they're cheating, they're killing, they're worshiping idols. So under Moses, they end up in exile. It's almost like this epic timeout. And it's not because God wants to punish them, it's because he wants to transform them. So they're sent into exile. And not to spoil the ending of this story, but the people, once they've entered the promised land, they're in the same sin and they're on a quick path to yet another exile. So the question we're asking ourselves today is, what were the warning signs? Was exile preventable? What could they have heeded the warning to early on to have a different result? Warning signs are meant to help us, not to hurt us, right? I know this for a fact. This morning when I came to drive here, my check engine light came on and I was like, this is a punishment. But it's not. It's my car trying to tell me, hey, there's something wrong inside. It needs to be diagnosed and treated. And if I ignore it, the car will die, right? The warning sign isn't the punishment. It's a mercy. It's trying to keep the death from happening. I think we have warning signs throughout our lives too. So my undergrad is actually like a dual history and political science. For a brief period of my life, I was like, I'm gonna go to law school. So anyone interested in history, you probably had like a world history interest stint, right? World War I and World War II, super interesting to study. If you've read any books or watched any documentaries on it, then you're likely familiar with the character Winston Churchill, right? So he wrote a lot. He really just took notes along his life. And he wrote this 6-part series. I read the first of it. The first of it is called The Gathering Storm. It was put out in 1948. It's both historical, but it's also quite cautionary. So Winston Churchill was definitely not the kind of person who was sitting in a study somewhere writing a book for people's entertainment. He was like in the trenches and he was noting down the things that he saw, and then they got put together to be these books. But in this book, he gives all of these warning signs. This is post-World War I. He's like, hey, we're heading in the wrong direction. Like all the signs say, this will end us in destruction yet again if we don't heed the warnings of what happened, what led us into the first war. He would argue that World War II, which ended up being the bloodiest, deadliest war in world history, was completely preventable if we just heeded the warning signs. In this really famous speech he gave to the House of Commons in 1948, he says, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So if you're in history classes, he gets quoted a lot, but it's actually quite heartbreaking that he's quoted a lot, because when you read his speeches, you can feel the passion, and that's why we like to read them. But this is a man who's desperate before people, and he's like, I see the writing on the wall. Will you please listen, turn around before it's too late? So as we look at the nation of Israel, this defiant kingdom, They're now split, if you were here last week, into the northern and southern kingdom. What were the warning signs they should have yielded to? We're going to first look at the northern kingdom, which, to remind you, is under King Jeroboam. So we're going to read a little bit of the story from 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 25 through 29. Jeroboam made a fort at Shechem in the hills of Ephraim and made that his headquarters. He also built a fort at Penuel. But then Jeroboam thought, man, it won't be long before the kingdom is reunited under David. As soon as these people resume worship at the temple of God in Jerusalem, they'll start thinking of Rehoboam, king of Judah, as their ruler. They'll then kill me and go back to King Rehoboam. It's really bad news. So the king came up with a plan. He made 2 golden calves. Then he announced, it's too much trouble for you to go to Jerusalem to worship. Look at these, the gods who brought you out of Egypt. He put one calf in Bethel and the other he placed in Dan. This was blatant sin. Think of it, people traveling all the way to Dan to worship a calf. First of all, this is just funny. The person who authored this is like throwing serious shade under the people and what they did. But beyond that, there's the obvious sin here, right? The people fall into idol worship under King Jeroboam. But what I want to draw your attention to is in this story is not that he led them into idolatry, but it's how he led them into idolatry. Because you can actually see his thought process in this story a little bit. Because he makes these idols because he wants to keep them from worshiping Yahweh, right? But it's almost like he knows that their history is a little too recent. Like they know better than to worship an idol. So he's like, I'm gonna tell them, isn't it a little inconvenient to travel all that way to Jerusalem, right? Like these are right here, they're right in front of you. This is easier. So he uses the tool of convenience to walk them right into sin. So there's that saying out there that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But in this story, the road to hell is paved with convenience. So the southern kingdom, they're under the leadership of King Rehoboam. So we're going to read a part of that story too, from 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 22 through 24. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, was king in Judah. He was 41 years old when he took the throne and was king for 17 years in Jerusalem, the city God selected from all the tribes of Israel for the worship of his name. Rehoboam's mother was Naamah the Ammonite. Judah was openly wicked before God, making him very angry. They set new records in sin, surpassing anything their ancestors had done. They built Asherah, sex and religion shrines, and set up sacred stones all over the place, on hills, under trees, wherever you looked. Worse, they had male sacred prostitutes polluting the country outrageously. All the stuff God had gotten rid of when he brought Israel into the land. So I think there are 2 warning signs we can see here. And the first I actually read in a commentary, and I just took it direct because I think it's so powerful, the way that he worded it. But he said the first sin of Israel is that they were actually vain in their imaginations of God. So we see them engaging in idol worship too, but if you read the story, their intentions actually began pure. They start carving images that are meant to reflect like God, right? To just worship him. But this desire to make images of God is actually went from worship into just like a control thing, into like something I can see, feel, and touch, something that's right in front of me. And it wasn't a reflection of a God who just can't be held, who is not that small, who can't be carved into something, right? Second, you see this rampant sexual exploitation happening amongst them. The question I wonder about when I read about this people is, did they want God or did they want to feel like gods? They seem to dance right in the middle of those 2 questions over and over. Idolatry, convenience, laziness, this pursuit of enlightenment, all of these things are warning signs of the people. Do I have any people who like to watch documentaries for fun? I'm just curious how alone I am in this. No, I'm not alone at all. Okay, so there was this documentary that came out a few years ago on the opioid pandemic in America. And I'll just be vulnerable with you. I was curious to watch it because opioid addiction runs in my family, and I was curious to understand it. So I started to watch this documentary. It was really good. They interviewed scientists and doctors and families who were affected. And a couple of the episodes, they spend time trying to get at like who's to blame for this epidemic, right? Whose fault is it? And one of the women, I can't remember if she was a scientist or doctor who was interviewed, she had this quote that I thought was so powerful and it really stuck with me. She said, "America became obsessed with being pain-free, and that was part of its downfall." Because the thing about pain is it actually acts as a warning sign, right? That there's something underneath that's wrong, that needs to be addressed. And if you just ignore the warning signs, it could lead literally to a death, right? But we also have souls that have these warning signs. I want you to hear this point, and I think it's so important. It's what you don't do the hard work to heal, you transfer. Your sin isn't just about you. In seminary, I took this class on family systems theory. So it's just, that's a fancy word for like, why do families operate the way that they do? And it's because a lot of pastors provide pastoral care, right? So they want you to be knowledgeable in the things that you're saying. And one of the assignments we were given, we had to make a family tree, and we had to go as far out as we could. And a lot of people were like, well, I don't know past my grandparents. And she was like, well, make phone calls, cousins, nieces, third cousins. And you wrote people's names and their role in the family. But then every person got a symbol. And symbols represented different things, right? If you were incarcerated, there's a symbol. If you have cut off relationships with the family from some type of dispute, there's a symbol. If you struggled with alcoholism, there's a symbol. And so on and so forth. If you divorced, there's a symbol. And what our professor knew that we didn't know is that as you're doing your family tree and you're doing these people and the symbols, when you take a step back from the big picture, it ends up looking like a gene almost, right? It's just these patterns repeated over and over and over. And the culmination of this project was we actually had to like a math problem, get the statistical likelihood of who we were gonna be in life based off the family system we came from. Which is kind of sobering, right? And I'll just tell you this, from my family system, I remember this, of all of the statistics, this is the one that I remember. It was, if I ever get married, there's an 80% chance that marriage ends in divorce based off the family system that I come from. And that was just so hard to look at, right? Because you're just looking at these things in your family that, I don't know if you want to call them weaknesses, but these pain points. I remember I walked into the class the day it was due, and this was a very high yapper class, lots of talking, lots of energy. And I walked in and it was dead quiet. Everyone was in there with their posters. And our professor came up and she was like, yeah, this class always feels like this the day this is due. And she's like, what I want you to hear is that this was a tool meant to be descriptive, to empower you to know where to do the hard work so that you can be a new type of human. It's not meant to be descriptive, right? So what I know is that if I don't yield the warning signs in my own family system of the places that I know I've received not great tools, right? I don't really have to guess the kind of person that I'm gonna be, because this destruction just kind of repeats itself over and over. But if I receive those warning signs as a mercy, and as an opportunity to be the new kind of person that the world needs, the result is restoration. So if you've read 1st and 2nd Kings, then you know that it's kind of bloody and violent, right? Again, for me, when I read them, I can be tempted to just sit in the hopelessness of is this really, are we always gonna be this way? But one of my favorite things to do is to look for God in the worst of the worst. And in 1st and 2nd Kings, there are stories and there are people of radical hope that feel like they don't even belong, but they're woven in. And so we're gonna look at those stories of those people. The first is in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1-7. One day, the wife of a man from the guild of prophets called out to Elisha, Your servant, my husband, is dead. You well know what a good man he was, devoted to God. And now the man to whom he was in debt is on his way to collect by taking my 2 children as slaves." Elisha said, "I wonder how I can be of help. Tell me, what do you have in your house?" "Nothing," she said. "Well, I do have a little oil." "Here's what you do," said Elisha. "Go up and down the street and borrow jugs and bowls from all your neighbors, and not just a few, all you can get. Then come home and lock the door behind you, you and your sons. Pour oil into each container. When each is full, set it aside." And she did what he said. She locked the door behind her and her sons. As they brought the containers to her, she filled them. When all the jugs and bowls were full, she said to one of her sons, "Another jug, please." He said, "That's it, there are no more jugs." Then the oil stopped. She went and told the story to the man of God. He said, "Go sell the oil and make good on your debts. Live, both you and your sons, on what's left." This is a story of a woman who lived at a time where women and children were really property, right? And so when men died, I'm sure the village would grieve not just the loss of him, but the loss of the women and children who are just kind of partitioned off, right? That's the way that the world was. And so it really would make sense to me that this would be a woman who would be like distraught, but also like, yeah, this is what happens. But instead she calls out because she seems to be familiar with a God as helper, right? And she's like, "Help." She doesn't know how, but she's just like, "Help. This, what happens to other people, it's not gonna happen to my family," right? And God shows up and there's this miracle performed that keeps her and her sons out of slavery. This is the story of a woman who was a new kind of human. There's yet another story in 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. Naaman was a general of the army under the king of Aram. He was important to his master, who held him in the highest esteem because it was by him that God had given victory to Aram. A truly great man, but afflicted with a grievous skin disease. We think it was leprosy. It so happened that Aram, on one of its raiding expeditions against Israel, captured, stole, kidnapped a young girl who became a maid to Naaman's wife. One day she said to her mistress, this is the little slave girl, "Oh, if only my master could meet the prophet of Samaria, he would be healed of his skin disease." If you haven't read this story, I'll tell you how it ends. Naaman ends up being healed from leprosy. But though his path to that healing came through this little slave girl. And again, I just imagine myself in her shoes, right? You're stripped from your family and your nation. You're in this place that's unfamiliar. You're in this house. You're performing slave labor. You might think, if your master's sick, you might be like, well, this is my sin nature, but like, good, maybe I'll get to go home. But that's not her posture. She literally points the person holding her as a slave to the healer. This is the story of a new kind of human. And lastly, we're going to look at 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 8 through 17. One day, Elisha passed through Shunem. A leading lady of the town talked him into stopping for a meal. And then it became his custom. Whenever he passed through, he stopped by for a meal. "I'm certain," said the woman to her husband, "that this man who stops by with us all the time is a holy man of God. Why don't we add on a small room upstairs and furnish it with a bed, desk, chair, and lamp so that when he comes by, he can stay with us?" And so it happened that the next time Elisha came by, he went to the room and lay down for a nap. Then he said to his servant Gehazi, "Tell the Shunammite woman I want to see her." He called her and she came to him. Through Gehazi, that's their servant, Elisha said, "You've gone far beyond the call of duty in taking care of us. What can we do for you? Do you have a request we can bring to the king or to the commander of the army?" She replied, "Nothing. I'm secure and satisfied in my family." Elisha conferred with Gehazi. He's like, is she just not telling me something? Surely there's got to be something her heart longs for. There's got to be something we can do for her, but what? Gehazi said, well, she has no son and her husband is an old man. Call her in, said Elisha. He called her and she stood at the open door. Elisha said to her, this time next year, you're going to be nursing an infant son. Oh, my master, oh, holy man, she said, don't play games with me, teasing me with such fantasies. The woman conceived. A year later, just as Elisha had said, she had a son. Who renovates their house to be hospitable to people, right? She sees God at work in someone and she's like, I don't care, honey. Rip up the upstairs. We're adding on. He's gonna come stay with us. And what I see in this story is when he asks what he can do, there actually is something that we know that she wants, but she doesn't even say it out loud. I see someone who's scared to even hope because she reads the writing in the wall that says it's impossible. And sometimes hoping for the impossible is painful, right? Because we don't know what's gonna happen. But this is a woman who becomes super familiar with a God who is a waymaker, right? A God with whom nothing is possible. And she encounters this miracle. So church, heal, forgive, get the help you need to break free from the addiction. Stand back up, hope again, have faith that's revived. David danced with abandon before the Lord. Who cares, right? We serve this God who can do anything. The divided kingdom of Israel gives us this picture of hopelessness, humanity in total defiance. But the kingdom of God, which is absolutely at work and alive today, gives us this picture of radical hope. You can't outwill your way of every form of destruction, but you can surrender to the God who has been and who always will be your helper, your healer, and your waymaker. We're gonna have prayer partners come forward today, and we're gonna do something that's a little youth groupy. I'm biased here, but sometimes I think church should be a little more youth groupy. But there's gonna be some note cards and pens across the altar. And I'm gonna invite you to physically respond. We talked about what you don't heal, you transfer. And I want you to think about your own family system. I want you to think about the culture that you're in, the city that you're in. We all have things that we've experienced that we're like, not again. It stops with me. My children won't receive this. My neighbor won't receive this. My friends won't receive this. It stops. I wish I could go back 5 years ago and talk to my family members who I knew were battling addiction. I didn't want to rock the boat, but part of me is like, who cares about rocking the boat? I want them to know freedom. We have to want ourselves and the people sitting next to us. This is a house of freedom. When we believe something, there's always a response to it, right? You're cheering for a sports team, you stand up and yell. You're at a concert, you sing. There's part of us, we are embodied people. And so sometimes I think with faith, we're like, I'll just say a prayer like quietly, like within myself. And that's fine, but your soul is still an embodied thing, right? So with your body, you're invited to worship. With your body, you're invited to surrender. And so if the Spirit moved in your heart today and you feel convicted about something that you are choosing today to break free from, I invite you to write it down on one of these note cards and leave it at the altar as just a physical way of saying today is the day. You can also take it to a prayer partner. I want to point out we actually have some students who have been trained to pray with you. If you have something that you're like, I've tried to break free from it, but I keep messing up, it's the human story, and you want accountability, you want something that's just like moves in you enough that you think today might actually be the day, try taking what you're surrendering to someone who is the next generation. Look in their eyes and say, it stops with me, right? You're making a promise, you're making a commitment to them to be a new kind of human that you were called to be from the very beginning. You're called to be the human that restores the world the way the Lord intended. So I invite you now to respond by coming forward.
All over this place, let's stand this morning. As Pastor Morgan has invited us, let's respond. It's built into our souls. We're called to respond to what the Lord has spoken in this place. And so as we worship, let's respond.
He's never